Well, happy post-Valentine's Day, love.
Oh, I love you.
And here we
Thankful
are.
for you.
I love you also. Two, as one might say. Just want to say thanks for listening. We heart you so much.
Mm-hmm.
And we have served up a steaming portion of Lysa TerKeurst for your post-Valentine's Day feast.
A small portion, as we will soon find out.
Well played. Well played, Jennie. Lysa TerKeurst is one of the smartest, kindest, most generous people. Fact? I'm asking.
It's true.
I mean, I'm lying, I'm dying. If I'm lying, I'm dying. That she is so smart, so gifted, and so generous, meaning she takes anything she's gone through and she serves it up for us to be benefited from, to be blessed by.
It's so true.
She is the head of Proverbs 31 and the author of so many books that have made a difference and made an impact in so many lives around the world.
Yeah.
She's a world-renowned speaker and leader, and she heads up a conference and something called COMPEL, where she helps writers put together their words and learn to speak and craft their messages. So beautiful. We've been on the receiving end of so many good Lysa moments. We toured with Lysa.
Yep.
And
her family.
And her family. We did, what was it, 12, 15 stops that tour?
I think so.
She's fun to be on the road with.
She's just fun to be with. She is fun. Towards the end of this podcast, she talks about just some fun things. And I think that is probably one of my most favorite things about her. She's very unexpectedly fun. And she finds like just the fun and beauty in life. And she's an amazing human and a great mom. And
she's
I just
very,
look up to her
very
so much.
encouraging. You
know,
if you encouraging. One thing that's fun is if you're ever with Lysa and you kind of like bash yourself, like, backhanded compliment to yourself, like, oh, well, I'm not that good at that anyway. She's always so good to say, take that thought captive.
Yep.
She won't let me get away with, ripping on myself. Like, I suck. She's like, take that thought captive.
Yep.
So she really does in big ways help people, but she does in little ways too.
Yeah, it's true.
And I have to just publicly say, if you've ever been encouraged by our books, anything we've ever written, she has been a Yoda to us.
Yes.
And I wish I'd have met her before I wrote Through the Eyes of a Lion.
Okay, here it is.
Here it is. Here it is.
The reason why she has a Y in her name
Lysa.
instead of an I is because she is a Yoda, and she focuses on you and not I.
Wow, that's so good, and I'm really profoundly moved by the fact that was what came after here it is. And it was some made up absurdity about her spelling of her name.
I know. It's not true, but I feel like it might be.
It's good. I like it. We'll go with it. Lysa's fun. And so any book post Through the Eyes of a Lion, we met her after that book had come out. But Swipe Right, I Declare War, Fight to Flourish, all Last Supper, she helped us work through the manuscripts and get clearer. And so generously. So we're very thankful. You'll find it in every acknowledgement of all of our books that, Lysa TerKeurst. And so if you've never heard of her, but maybe you've read one of our books, you've seen that name. And we're excited to introduce you to someone who has helped us so much.
Yes.
So she's a brilliant, brilliant person and has suffered much.
Yeah.
And her most recent book is kind of her way of processing that, going through that hardship. With, as she calls it, the death of her marriage.
Yeah.
And so to anybody, listening who you're like, man, I got a friend who's worked through a divorce or has gone through a hard situation. This book, Boundaries and Goodbyes, is a really helpful way of saying, hey, how do I move through what is a very hard relationship to navigate and put in boundaries and do I have God's blessing to do so? All that. So this is a great book and a great conversation.
Yeah. Life-changing.
Here's Lysa TerKeurst. Our friend that we're excited to have this conversation with. Well, Lysa TerKeurst, we are so thrilled to welcome you back to Hey, It's the Luskos.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. I love when I look on my calendar and I see something with the Luskos. That is a happy day for me. So Yay. This
Oh
is the
my
highlight
gosh.
of my day today.
We've
Aw.
We intruded in. We found the gatekeeper. We paid them off. We tied them up and hid them. You're like, how'd this get on the calendar? Oh my gosh. But here we are.
The trolls let us in.
Yeah. It's like in Lord of the Rings. You know, you just got to find your way in however you can, throw the ring in the volcano, all the stuff.
Oh my god.
That's so funny. Well, I want to know who you paid because they just surely didn't share that profit with me.
That is funny. Lisa, it's a new year. We're just barreling towards 2024 already. Can you believe it? We're in February. As time as this is being listened to, it's just we're one day after Valentine's Day. So this is the aftermath of Valentine's Day. That's kind of a nice relief, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Because Valentine's Day is complicated for a lot of people,
Mhm.
you know, whether you're married or single or in the process of trying to figure out really hard relationship dynamics. Sometimes a holiday like Valentine's Day can make what hurts about relationships even more apparent.
Yeah.
And so I just have a lot of compassion for people around. I think Valentine's is beautiful to celebrate love. We should celebrate love. And I don't want this to take anything away from that. But then it's also a time of really being completely aware of what you don't have for a lot of people. And that can be complicated.
That's
Yeah.
true. What for you, because I know sometimes growing up, like Valentine's Day or even holidays in general, like what was Valentine's Day for you growing up? Like, did you celebrate or was it not really a thing that your family did? Or did you like it, like giving Valentine's Day as a elementary school kid? Like, what would that look like for you?
The shoebox on your desk that
Yeah,
Billy
I mean,
would put a Valentine in.
Yeah, pretty much. It was like, okay, are we doing Snoopy? Are we doing, you know, like some other little cartoon character from back in the day? Because, you know, I'm much older than you guys. So we didn't have all these modern day characters. But yeah, we made the shoebox and exchanged the Valentines. And, you know, sometimes some people gave candy and some people didn't. And, you know, that was the thing. But, you know, all through high school, I never really dated. And so Valentine's was never something that I was like, oh, yay, we're going to go do this big celebration for Valentine's Day. It was always kind of like, you know, it's there and we can celebrate love and we should. And that's great. But it was not a big holiday for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
We could take or leave it probably.
I know. It's kind of fun to celebrate with the kids, but I usually forget. Sorry,
Well,
kids.
here, I'll just do a really quick, just like FYI public service announcement. Honestly, I think a woman's heart would rather have a simple dandelion on a no-name day than a dozen roses on a Hallmark holiday.
That's so true, Lisa.
Put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Honestly.
It's good stuff. Yeah, we usually do something like around the week, but never the day of, because it's just you're competing with everybody in the world and trying to get a babysitter can be hectic and all the things. So.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, very good.
Well, you're in, you were telling us how fun. We have not been together in a minute to sit down and catch up. And I wish it was happening over a big old bowl of chips and guac instead of on Riverside. But we'll take what we can get. We paid the trolls off and here we are. You were telling us that you've had quite the transformation and metamorphosis and just been hitting it hard with the gym and the diet, I imagine.
Yep. Yeah. So not as much with the gym, mostly focused on diet. But you know, taking walks and I need to add a more definite tonal workout into my day because all of my kids use my tonal. Shout out to Levi and Jennie. They gave me that as an amazing gift. And so my whole family revolves around it, by the way.
That is awesome.
They do. And so, but yeah, I've spent the last many, many years, really since 2013, navigating some really hard stuff. And then in a very long season of trying to take care of and be focused on helping someone else that it was so all consuming that, you know, I didn't spend the time that I needed to take care of myself. And I kind of lost myself in some parts of the process because the grief was so deep and the pain was so overwhelming. And then it culminated in the death of my marriage, which is what I like to call it rather than a divorce. But I just had this epiphany last year that it was time to focus on my healing, and I had been doing really well with my healing in the emotional area and somewhat in the spiritual area too, by getting some really good counseling. And I have not stopped my counseling since 2016. I mean, I have been knee deep in counseling very consistently and really liking it. But I just decided I needed to focus on my physical health, and I did. And then it just was a miraculous transformation. And I haven't talked about it on Instagram. People ask me questions, when they see pictures of me, because I actually wound up losing 60 pounds. So that's a lot of weight. And people always say to me, you don't look like you had 60 pounds
I would
to
have
lose.
been right there to raise my hand and say that exact thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think I dressed in a way that just, and I'm tall, and I can, I carry my weight all over. So it really wasn't incredibly apparent to other people, but it was so very apparent to me. I felt the weight of the past on me.
Wow.
And so even more than like wanting to get smaller physically, I needed to release the weight of the past. And that meant the physical weight, the emotional weight, and some of the trauma weight and all of that. And so for me, it was more about letting go of the past and deciding to step into the future in the way that I wanted to. So it wasn't so much about, I want to be a different size or all of that. I want my body to be healthy. But at the same time, there was just a lot of weight on me, physically and metaphorically. And I needed to leave the past in the past and walk forward. So I did.
Beautiful.
Lisa, first of all, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And we do want to talk a lot more about that, because you've been so generous with your pain and what you've learned, and your extensive biblical knowledge and study, and alongside the work of your counseling and your counselor. His voice comes through in this so loud and clear and powerfully. But I want to just kind of talk about that. I mean, because we're still new enough into the new year, where a lot of people are still in a good way thinking about that, but everyone always is. What period of time was that over? I can't imagine, because this doesn't seem like it was some crash thing that you did it like over the course of, you said it was how many months for that 60 pounds?
A year.
Okay.
Wow.
And what were some of the big diet changes that you made, or was there one thing you ascribed to, or is it a lot of different things?
Yeah, it was portion control. And, I think there's so many diets available and everything, but, mine was much more in the vein of a lot of the principles that I wrote about in Made to Crave. I just went back and revisited. The ministry decided to do an online Bible study of Made to Crave last year. And, I wanted to just revisit all that I had learned and taught in Made to Crave. And so I did. And it was just amazing that I wrote back in 2008, 2009, that book released in, I think, January 2010. I wrote back then what I would need now. And so I read that. But the main thing is there's so many diets. And I think going through menopause and going through trauma, my body just started holding on to weight. And so I went and talked to my doctor about it. And I thought maybe I needed to do some kind of hormone therapy, but I had breast cancer back in 2017. And so that wasn't going to be a real good option for me. So we talked about a lot of things, but basically it's calories in, calories out. And I know that sounds like the most old-fashioned thing in the world, but that is the only thing that worked for me. I tried many, many of the diets, and they just weren't working. So it just became a mathematical formula. And it wasn't even that I was counting calories. It's just, I realized when I sit down to eat a meal, and I know you know this, I mean, a lot of people know this, but when you sit down to eat a meal, don't eat until you're full. Just have the designated portion that is a good, healthy amount to eat for your lunch or for your dinner, and eat that. And sometimes I would be hungry, but if I gave it 20 minutes, I would be full.
Yeah.
So it's almost like it took 20 minutes for I don't know if it's the satiety genes or whatever it's called, but anyways, it takes 20 minutes for it to register. Oh, actually you're full. And so what I had been doing is I was just eating until I was full. And then after 20 minutes, I felt over full.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's it.
Gosh.
Did
simpler
you give
than we make
yourself
it.
a cheat day in that, or do you, or like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I didn't need a cheat day because I could eat whatever I wanted. I do gravitate toward healthy things. I do like really good salads and I like vegetables and I really like fruits and all of that. But I didn't need a cheat day because when you focus on portion control, you can really eat whatever you want.
Yeah.
You just have to eat it in moderation and making my portions smaller. I mean, it really is miraculous what happened. It really is. And I never felt deprived.
Did you use an app to kind of keep track of it? I know there's a lot of different tracking apps. No,
I didn't. I did not. I just trusted the process.
Just had a good sense of what the right amount of calories were. And did you adjust it if you had a high calorie expend day? Like if you did
Well,
do something?
I didn't even count the calories. I just paid attention to the portion. How I started off actually is I would think about how much would I normally eat and I would cut that in half. And then after a little while, I said, okay, I've got half. Now, do I need to cut any more of it? And I just figured out my portion size. So I never counted calories. It was all just looking at the portion on the plate and eating what I needed, not necessarily all that I wanted.
Brilliant.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that, Lisa. It's so helpful.
Yeah.
And it's so simple.
Yeah.
Really. But what's so amazing though, I mean, I love your book, Good Boundaries and Goodbyes. It's been so encouraging to me, but even just like your picture in the back of the book, I was like, dang girl, you have such a glow about you.
Come
and
on, show it for the camera. It's a good looking picture.
I know, you just look amazing. You always do. But you just see that. You see the health of your emotional health, your spiritual health, your physical health. Like it just shows. And I'm just thankful for how you've been obedient to walk in what God's calling you to.
Thank you. I went through different seasons as I walked through the death of my marriage and all the trauma that led up to it. So I went through this really long season of just begging God for what I wanted. I wanted my marriage to be restored. I wanted my family back together. And I mean, I was willing to do anything. And I think you guys walked alongside of me enough in that journey. I mean, I left no stone unturned, and there were some healthy reasons for that. And there were some unhealthy reasons for that. There were some noble parts of that. And then there were some, just things that I needed to work through in counseling that were kind of the downside of what seemed noble at first. So, I went through that season, and then I went through this season of grieving, just deep, deep grief, because I felt like not only was I losing this person who was my person, it's hard to lose your person. And it comes out in the weirdest ways. Like you'll go fill out a form and they're like, who's your emergency contact? And you're like, oh, actually, I don't have my person, or you get mail forever in both spouses' name. I mean, this Christmas, I still got cards, addressed to me and my former husband. So, the grief comes in waves, and it comes big things, small things, whatever. So I went through this very intense time of grief. And then slowly I started working toward acceptance. And then slowly I started working toward this anticipation of just something new, even though I was still in this really weird place of not sure how to step into this new. And now I'm just in this place where I feel so happy and so free. And what's strange is it's not that the uncertainties have lessened. It's not like I can clearly see into my future. I don't have my person, still, but I am willing to look at the future and actually be excited about it. And I've been doing these things called rebellious acts of resilience.
Ooh.
And
writing that down.
I love it because it has given me an opportunity, instead of getting frustrated or angry when something reminds me that I'm single. For example, I was at the beach this summer and the ice maker in that house broke. And I was so aggravated because I thought if he was here, he would know how to fix this. And now I love ice. And now it's just a whole situation. I was so frustrated. And so then I heard myself say, well, I can't fix this. And I just stopped myself and I just said, why are you saying I can't? Don't say I can't, because maybe you could. And so I looked online how to fix the ice maker. I fixed
No,
it,
you
y'all.
did not.
Dang, girl.
I sure did.
Come on.
I know it sounds like such a small thing, but that one act of rebellious resilience, it did something for me huge, just huge. I felt like I was just walking in victory of my healing.
Yeah.
And it was just amazing. And so the other phrase I kept looking for is not only I can't, but I don't. And, I have said forever, I don't go swimming in the ocean. I just don't, because there's creatures, there's risk, there's, all kinds of stuff. And so, one time I was down there with my friend last summer and she was begging me to go on the boogie board. And I was like, I don't get in the ocean. And she was like, it's so much fun. It's so much fun. Please just try it. And I was like, nope, you're going to have to go without me. Well, she went without me and I stayed there and I was taking videos of her, and just so she could share it with her kids and stuff. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, look at what I'm missing out on. And so I just stood up. I grabbed the extra boogie board. I ran and I jumped in the ocean. My friend almost had a heart attack. She was like, what changed? And I said, I found myself saying, I don't do the ocean. Why did I do that? I can do the ocean. And I love oceans. I love to have fun. And so I just jumped in the ocean. We rode the waves and I got out of the ocean and I was so excited. It was just another moment of victory for me.
Wow.
Rebellious acts of resilience.
That's beautiful. That's life-changing.
It can't backfire though. We were on vacation and I was trying to convince my kids to snorkel. No, there's sharks. No, there's sharks. I'm like, there's no sharks at this part of the beach. They have all agreed to not come here, blah, blah, blah. So we all snorkel and then we're literally at the airport heading home, and breaking news, 10 miles from where we were, tiger shark eats woman who's snorkeling. Her husband sees a commotion, looks up. She's gone. Only her bathing suit and a little piece of her snorkel washed up on shore. Never seen again.
How did I not know this?
I never told anybody in our family until now, because I was like, oh my God, if they find this out, they're never getting wet again. So.
Man, that's so convicting though, because I find myself saying the same thing. And I don't actually like being in the ocean either. But
she doesn't
maybe
like
one
getting
day
salt water in her ears or her eyes. That's her problem.
Or my mouth.
She didn't like that. She didn't like all that.
Or my skin.
I don't either. But the moral of your story, Levi, is not to let you pick the beach that we would go get in the ocean. So
Look,
Jennie,
I'll pick
the beach.
Thank you.
Yeah, what's the least sharky beach then? What are we going to call that?
Look, you know what? I'm not focusing on the sharks. I'm focusing on my victory. That's what I'm focusing on. Okay. There are risks to every activity. There's a risk right now of you sitting here doing this podcast, but you overcame it. And so it was all about overcoming. So we're not going to focus on the sharks. We acknowledge they're real, but we are going to focus on the victory.
Thank you, Lisa.
And if we do think about sharks, we're going to choose to think about Bruce from Finding Nemo, because he's Australian and seems very nice. And he says that fish are friends, not food, so that's what we're going to choose.
There you have it.
This book, Lisa, is so important. It's so powerful and such a gift to all of us who need it currently or will at some point, or we know someone in our life. Every one of us can think of somebody who's navigating a situation where they need to figure out. I can't tell you how many times pastorally and also just socially where I'm talking to someone who's trying to figure out, where to put that line, how to put that line. And I think we need to start kind of by talking a little bit about it with a very important thing that you from the very beginning bring out. And that is that boundaries are not our idea. It's not like we're having to manufacture this. You're trying to point, this is and has been since creation, God's idea. How did that epiphany dawn on you?
Well, I think a lot of my resistance for a long time with boundaries is I felt like it was a psychological principle that possibly violated some scriptural truths. For example, I would always think, no, I shouldn't have boundaries because it's biblical to lay down your life for a friend or for your friends, But then it dawned on me one day, yeah, Jesus taught us that and he modeled it. But Jesus laid down his life for a high and holy purpose, to accomplish a high and holy purpose, not to enable bad behaviors to continue. And so that really got me thinking about boundaries. So I started in Genesis and realized, wow, right from Genesis 1, that God established the foundations of this world using boundaries. He separated light from darkness, and that separation is a boundary. There was a boundary between the light and the darkness. He separated the land from the sea. There was a boundary. He separated the sky from the land. There's a boundary there. Wow. And so that was just fascinating in Genesis 1. Then I got into Genesis 2, and of all the topics that God could have chosen to focus on for the first recorded conversation between God and man, he chose the topic of a boundary. And God, and he did, the way God did it was so brilliant. He established freedom, because boundaries really are, once you know where the boundary is, then that's where true freedom exists. So God told Adam, you are free to eat from any tree in this garden. There's the freedom, but you must not eat from this one tree. Here's the restriction. Yeah. Or else you will die. And it was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so then there's the consequence, because a boundary without a consequence is nothing but a really poor suggestion. So God really modeled this. And I just found it so completely fascinating. And if you look at the purpose of the boundary, it wasn't because God was just in the mood to be overly restrictive. It was actually God was trying to protect the relationship. And that's really what this whole book is about. It's not about shoving people away. It's about loving people well without losing the best of who you are. So if we want to protect our relationships, healthy relationships have healthy boundaries.
Yeah. And to the person who's hypothetical objector, they're going, well, yeah, but that's Old Testament. This is from Ananias and Sapphira, to the rejection of a divisive man after the second and third admonition, to the releasing to the Satan that his soul might be saved. I mean, this is something that's thoroughly New Testament. That's not just Old Testament. It's all over the Bible.
It is. And Jesus was so brilliant in how he modeled boundaries. So think about his conversation with the rich young ruler. Jesus clearly established that there was a boundary, like go and Jesus could look at the man's heart. He wasn't just looking at his exterior wealth. He was looking at the man's heart. And so when he says, go give your possessions away, it was for the sake of his heart. And so Jesus said, do this, if this, then this. And the man chose not to, and he walked away. And there's no evidence that Jesus chased him down and begged him. And he just, with great love and with great compassion, but with absolute clarity, Jesus drew the boundary. And, and it was for the man. It was for the sake of that relationship. And it wasn't just because Jesus was in the mood to be overly restrictive. And so we see Jesus modeling this. We see God establishing it. Right. And so that started to give me the biblical confidence and, honestly, the emotional fortitude to start really looking at healthy boundaries. Because where there is chaos in our relationships, there is a need for a boundary. And so I started looking, where is the chaos in some of my relationships? And where there's chaos, there's a need for a boundary.
Yeah. And Jesus modeled it too. I mean, from his unwillingness to commit himself to all men because he knew what was in them, to his refusal to take the goading of his brothers. Hey, go up to Jerusalem and prove yourself. He drew really firm boundaries. Who are my mothers? Who are my brothers? Those who do the will of God. So, I mean, this isn't even just something he taught in principle form. It's something that he lived out because he had unbelieving, hostile family members that he had to navigate until, of course, the resurrection. Then all of a sudden, James is like, I'm in. Let's leave the church at Jerusalem and go to my death, right? But in the early days, I mean, he had to navigate that dance. He's making Capernaum his home base instead of Nazareth, because in Nazareth, they tried to throw him off a cliff. So he drew a hard boundary with Nazareth and said, prophets don't get honor in their own hometown. So for the rest of his life, you literally do not see him and even telling the disciples to not keep preaching if they've casted their pearls before swine, but to shake the dust off. What is that? That's a boundary, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's right. Absolutely. And Jesus had the weight of the responsibility of being the savior of the world, and he still drew boundaries. And sometimes I think when we don't draw boundaries, we are in essence saying we can take on the weight of the world. And that's just not possible.
Yeah.
And, I think here's a really important distinction. Sometimes if you look at why you're not drawing boundaries, it's not just because there's hardship with the other person. Why we're not drawing a boundary, for me, a lot of it was people pleasing. But here's the deal. I wasn't people pleasing just to try to make everyone happy. That's what it looks like on the outside. But I was people pleasing because I was getting something from that other person that I was worried if I didn't please them, they would take from me, and I didn't want to risk losing that. See, we will always want from other people what we desperately fear we will not get from God.
Ooh,
Gosh.
ooh.
Wow, Lisa.
That's the thing. Okay, so
Goodness
can you
gracious.
give us maybe some warning signs you might have an unhealthy boundary if ... just for those who are like, how can I know if this is something I'm dealing with?
Okay, well, if you're talking about unhealthy boundaries are when you're trying to manipulate, control, or threaten or punish, so the purpose of the boundary should never be those things. It's not to manipulate. It's not to control. It's not to punish and all of that. So those are examples of unhealthy boundaries. If you're looking at a healthy boundary, the purpose of a healthy boundary is to really assess the access that you've granted to the other person. And so a lot of times we will give level 10 access to someone and they're only bringing level 3 responsibility. And when that happens, the distance between those two, that's where dysfunction grows. And that's where that chaos will come. And that's where the boundary is needed. So it used to be, I would try to put a boundary on this person to try to make them be more responsible with the access I granted them. But we cannot create sustainable change if that other person doesn't want to change. If they are unwilling or incapable of bringing anything more than a level 3 responsibility, putting a boundary on them is not going to help. It's just going to increase the tension and frustration. So instead, I put the boundary on myself by reducing the access I grant that person down to a level 3 to match their level of responsibility. And again, I got this from looking at how God designed the temple. God gave certain people access, but he did not give all access. And it wasn't because certain people were more valuable than the others. It's just he required more responsibility the more access he gave the person. Yeah. So the person that had the most access was the high priest going into the Holy of Holies once a year to make an atonement for the sins of the people. Well, that high priest had to be absolutely purified and completely cleansed. And so he had to demonstrate the highest level of responsibility. So when I started to recognize this, I'm like, wow, high access requires high responsibility. And I think we need to be really careful about continuing to entrust our heart to someone who has continuously broken our heart. And so when I say access, I don't just mean physical access. I mean giving that person access to my time, to my money, to my emotional capacity, because we're all limited in our capacity. We're limited in our capacity, not because we're unkind and unchristian. We're limited in our capacity because we're human.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and here's the great news. Are you ready for some great news, Levi?
Yes.
We're ready.
Yes.
I'm gonna prove to you already do this really well. You ready for this?
Yes.
Okay. Do you feel like you already do this really well? Maybe not, but
yeah. Here we are.
okay. But I'm going to prove to you in an area of your life you are doing this really well. So, do you guys have a bank account?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a passcode, like a security passcode on that bank account?
Yes.
Indeed. We have two-factor authentication. Got to get the text message.
That's right. Okay. So is that because you're unkind and unchristian that you would restrict access to the general population to your bank account?
Well, we got burned by some hackers in Australia who tried to buy a $3,000 handbag on Jennie's debit card, Lisa. So we really stepped up our security after that.
It really was.
Exactly.
It wasn't me. I promise.
Yeah. I'm like, sweetheart, what is this?
So, so chances are you're not willing to give people your account number and your passcode and allow any of us to have access to your bank account. And it's not because you're unkind and unchristian. It's because we haven't demonstrated the level of responsibility for you to give me or any of the listeners access to your bank account, because you have limited funds in your account and you have responsibilities for those limited funds. You have a limited financial capacity. Therefore, the access that you give people to that limited amount of capacity in your finances is really important. If you give someone access, they have to bring a very high level of responsibility. So we know this with our financial capacity, but we forget it with our emotional capacity, with our physical capacity, with our relational capacity. And so we keep giving too much access without requiring people to be responsible with that access.
That's so good. This is all so life-changing. And one thing that I love about this book is how you include little notes from your counselor, from Jim. And I think that if people truly read this and take to heart these truths and these practical things that they can learn. I mean, you're talking about triggers. He's literally saying, this is a note about triggers. And it's like, okay, if everyone were to know what a trigger is, like, I feel like I just learned what a trigger was like maybe 2 years ago. But I feel like if we could actually lean into this and really glean the wisdom that you write and things that your counselor takes note on, this is life-changing. And
you're going to save people a lot of money in therapy too. I mean, obviously they should go themselves, but even if they don't, they're going to get a lot there,
but
right?
It's just beautiful. And how you end each chapter with, now let's live this. And you kind of make a bullet point. I think that's so helpful for me as I'm taking notes. It's like, okay, I'm reminding myself, or you're helping us remind ourselves, oh, this is what we just read. This is how we can receive. This is how we can pray this in. And it's just beautiful. And thank you, Lisa.
Oh, thank you, Jennie.
And obviously you're dealing with the, a specific case example of a marriage,
but I like how you do talk about friendships in here too.
That's what I was trying to get at. I'm trying to say, you're where you personally that spurred you to writing this, learning the hard way, all these things was marriage, but this does apply, and you do weave it through so many different things. So I guess I was curious, as it's been out for a while and you've started to hear back how people in the real world have used it. No, even though you already did that, obviously in the very beginning, you give endorsements from the average reader who has read this and found it helpful.
I love that you do that.
But as it's kind of hit oxygen and people have, seen it and felt, where have you maybe been surprised by people commonly saying, hey, it's helped me on this situation? Is there any kind of common denominator to that surprised you a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's really helping people in having honest but loving, productive conversations with one another. And one of the greatest joys is when people read the book in community. So maybe a husband and wife read it together, then they have a common language around boundaries, and they start really appreciating what boundaries can do for their relationship, instead of one person reading it and the other person becoming resistant, like, why are you changing things? But when people read this in community, it is amazing what can happen. And so, some of us, I think a lot of us, we know the right thing to do, but we have such a hard time communicating that because it feels awkward. You don't know the words to use. So I do give a lot of scripts in the book, and I'm not telling people what to think or what to say. I'm just giving them a lot to think about. And then so I think that's been amazing. I'm convinced more relationships die, not because we attempt to have the hard conversations, like the hard boundary conversations, and they don't go well, but more relationships die because we refuse to have the conversations that were desperately needed.
Interesting. So it's almost like you don't put the boundary thinking you'll save the relationship, but you end up killing it as a result.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people, here's what happens. We are tempted to live in extremes. And so what happens with a lot of people is they would rather suffer through what not having a boundary is doing to them than step over that line and try to communicate a boundary. And so we go from the extreme of it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, to one day it's not fine. And now I just can't deal with this relationship anymore. And what boundaries do is boundaries help bring it in the middle so we're not living in extremes.
Gosh.
Okay, so let's say someone has a relationship or a friendship that they feel like the boundary needs to perhaps be made more firm and a little less access is going to be granted. What might be some warning lights on the indicator on the dashboard that would be like, okay, hey, this might be a relationship that is due for a boundary downgrade in access?
Well, when you start saying things like, "Oh, I cannot keep dealing with this," or when you say, this relationship is really wearing me out, or you see a text message from them and you just think, I can't deal with that right now. Or you see a call from them and you just let it roll over to voicemail, even if you could answer it, because they're about to make a request of you. And instead of knowing how to communicate a boundary with that request, you just kind of want to avoid it. So when that starts to happen, then, like I said, where there's chaos or where there's mounting frustration and building resentments, that's usually an indication that a boundary is needed. So let's take, for example, let's say you have a wonderful friend, Jennie, and you and your friend like to go to conferences together, but you've noticed that you are starting to not want to go to conferences with her anymore because she's always late. And for you, being on time is a high priority and you can't relax if you're not on time. But as you take a step back, you start to realize she's not a bad person and you're not a bad person. You just have different definitions of what it means to step into a conference. And so instead of avoiding this friend and instead of kind of say like, hey, I can't ride with you, making up all kind of excuses that are just lame. And honestly, she's going to feel rejected and hurt and all of this. Instead of that, you could have a conversation with her and say, hey, I love attending conferences with you. If that's true, then say the truth. I love attending conferences with you. Here's the thing. We have a different definition of being on time, and that does not make you wrong and me right. It just means we're different. And so I still want to attend conferences with you. And the thing is, I need to get there 20 minutes early because that's my definition of being on time. If you want to do that with me, great, we'll ride together. But if not, here's the great news. I'll get there 20 minutes early. I'll save you a seat. And no matter when you get there, you're going to have an awesome seat and we will do the conference together. And the only thing we're losing is riding together, which is no big deal, honestly, if we sit back and assess it. And so do you see how it could take what is this mounting thing that's risking the relationship and the connectivity in the relationship to down? It's like, no, it's much simpler than that. We just won't ride together, but we can still have a fantastic relationship. We can still have a fantastic time at the conference. Now, I know a lot of situations are more complicated than that, but I just think we don't need to overcomplicate the hardships in our relationships, and boundaries help uncomplicate it. Boundaries help us communicate what is and is not acceptable, what we will and will not tolerate, what we can and cannot give. And when we have those healthy conversations in love, then we'll have a healthier relationship. And here's the deal. Healthy people respect healthy boundaries. Mm-hmm. And so if you're dealing with someone who absolutely will not respect your boundary, then that's an indication that the boundary is definitely needed. So, yeah.
That's so good, because I think the focus of, you want a healthy relationship. And I think that is the doing the hard work, having the hard conversation. That's just so helpful to have that mindset, because I think maybe sometimes, and I think I fall under this, when things get hard, I can just kind of start backing up slowly and just kind of like dissolve into the background, because like I don't even know where to start. I don't know how I would even have this conversation. But truly, if we're called to love one another, to have these conversations is so vital. And so this just encourages me and inspires me and challenges me to just have like it. And it might not be like, I love that you said that example, because I think sometimes it is those little things
that you don't really know where to start or how to have that conversation. It might not even necessarily be huge, but if we can start practicing those little things, and that's something that my counselors told me, is just start practicing bringing something up in a little way, because that will help you have the strength and the mindset to have those bigger conversations. And I think that is so helpful.
And here's the other thing, Jennie, I think it's important for us to establish who we want to be and what we want to be known for in our relationships.
Yeah.
And so what we need to do is, like, for me, I sat down and I wrote, okay, I am kind, I am generous, I am easygoing, I am I'm a noticer of other people's needs and all of that. So that's the best of who Lysa is. And that's what I want to keep front and center in my relationships. But when I start to get worn down and worn out, frazzled and fractured because I keep tolerating things that I shouldn't tolerate, or I keep giving when I know I'm kind of feeling bankrupt here. And so what happens is suddenly it's not the best version of Lysa in that relationship. I go from being patient to impatient. I go from being generous to withdrawing. I go from noticing their needs to noticing the things about them that aggravate me to death. And so this is so important for us.
Yeah.
Like, we are called by God not to control other people, but to be self-controlled.
Yeah.
And for me, that means I need to be self-controlled enough to give every fighting chance for the best version of Lysa to stay front and center in my relationships, and to not let that worst version of Lysa be front and center. And I have to notice my capacity, because if I get bankrupt, it will be the worst version of me.
Right.
And we don't have to, I think if we're vulnerable in our conversations, we don't want to over-explain. My counselor always says, adults inform, children explain. So we don't want to over-explain, but we can also be true to how we're wired and true to our heart. So if you're getting a request and you can't do it, a lot of times I'll say, my heart says yes, 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 but the reality of my time makes this a no. I will cheer you on, or even I don't have that to give, but I could give this little part of it, And so I think we can be vulnerable with, gosh, my heart would love to say yes to that. It's just the reality of my time makes this a no. And I'm working on the reality of my time and my limited capacity right now.
That's
good.
That's more life-giving than making up an excuse that you think is going to make them feel better, but then you're basically, it's like credit card spending, pushing it off.
Huh.
But I did want to ask, so two questions, and you can kind of run through them and however you want and attack them however you want. But I just want to kind of let you go a little bit. The actual conversation where you're sitting them down, any tips that can give us, helpful, some best practices of having that difficult conversation where we're now going to inform them of the new boundary. Secondly would be when someone has been downgraded for a while and maybe you see change, or maybe they're trying to make you see change to make you feel like they've trusted, but I've been fooled twice, so shame on me. Is there any benchmark in how much time we need to see water under the bridge before we're willing to reassess the level that they have?
Okay, so let's attack the second question first. So trust is built time plus believable behavior. So it's not just about giving it enough time. It's also about witnessing enough believable behavior that you have the confidence now that you can maybe release some of the boundary and maybe some of the restrictions. And so it is going to take time, but you're also going to have to see believable behavior in order for that trust to grow. So that's what I would say to the second one. The first one, when we sit someone down and have a boundary conversation, remember it's for the purpose of love. And it's not for the purpose of, causing more trauma in the relationship. It really is for the purpose of love. And since it is for the purpose of love, then we have to be loving in how we communicate it. But we also have to be certain of ourselves. So we never want to establish a boundary and say, okay, because we're not asking for permission.
Great.
We we are informing them of what the boundary is. But we also don't want to be so rigid that we don't let them ask questions. So it's okay. And it's natural. If you're creating a little bit of a change, then let them ask the questions and answer truthfully and honestly, but answer in love. But how I really like to start these conversations is by honoring what is honorable in that person. So we do want to honor what is honorable. And I think that helps the defenses not immediately go up, and it sets the tone for a conversation. And then after we honor what's honorable, then we need to own whatever issue we might be having that's creating the need for this boundary. For example, I could own, I have to acknowledge with you that I struggle with people pleasing. And so because I struggle with people pleasing, I have said yes so many times that now it's getting me in a worn out place. And so I am working on this in my life. And part of how I'm working on it is drawing necessary boundaries, not to push you away, but to protect my capacity, because God has revealed to me, in order for the best of who I am to stay front and center, I have to tend to this. So see how you're owning honestly what you're working on. And you're not attacking them. You're not pointing the finger at them. And then if they do have some behaviors, what you want to, that you need to address, remember, you're not putting the boundary on them. So you want to make sure that you're giving them a choice, because that's really what the boundary is. And so, for example, if Uncle Joe is coming over for Sunday night dinner at your house, and okay, let's just establish we're not talking about any Uncle Joe that anybody knows. Okay.
Sure.
So we're not,
Let me give you a real world. Let's give you a real world example. Let's say someone has in-laws that kind of want them at their Christmas every year or first thing, but they kind of want to have their own family Christmas maybe, or go to their other in-laws or something like that. And you have to kind of lay a boundary down with them, you know?
So in that scenario, it's not necessarily behavior that has to change, but it's a new pattern you're trying to establish for the sake of your family. And so I would honor them by saying, it is important for families to be together at Christmas. And we want to honor the fact that you want us there. That is a huge gift to me and my kids, because all of that's true. And then we don't want to say, but, because if you say but at that point, it negates everything you just said.
Right.
So you want to say and. So it's like, honor them. We consider it such an honor that you've invited us, and we do think family is important. And because we think family is so important, we are really focusing on establishing traditions for our new family here. And it's important for us to establish those, because our family can use those traditions to create a sense of connectivity and bonding. And we want our kids to have that in our home. And so if you have it to give to invite them over, then great. So you could say, you're welcome. We want to do Christmas with you, but because of these newly established traditions in our home, you're welcome to come if that's okay. And so you've got to sort of navigate some of that, but you admit what you're trying to accomplish without dishonoring or blaming them or pointing the finger at them. But back to Uncle Joe, let's say Uncle Joe comes to your family dinner and he brings up politically divisive topics, and you already know you will not have the emotional capacity for him to do that at this Sunday dinner, right? And so you, in an effort not to control him, but in an effort to protect you, you just have a conversation with Uncle Joe, and you say, Uncle Joe, I'm requesting at our family dinner. First of all, I want to say you are so smart and you study all this stuff with politics, and I respect that about you. And I don't have the emotional capacity this week to get into a debate, which sometimes can happen when we're having these political conversations. So I'm requesting that no divisive political conversation gets brought up at the dinner table. Now, it's completely your choice, Uncle Joe, whether you do bring it up or whether you don't bring it up. But I'm going to go ahead and let you know my plan, because I want to be honoring of you. If it gets brought up, I am choosing to protect my emotional capacity, not to participate in the conversation. So just letting you know ahead of time, I'll turn to the other end of the table and I'll participate in a different conversation. Or I will just very respectfully and without any kind of show or announcement or anything, I'll just go into the kitchen and check on the dessert until that part of the conversation is over, and then I'll rejoin the table. But either way, you're not trying to control him. You are informing him that you are not willing to participate in that conversation, and you're requesting that he not bring it up. But if he does, instead of trying to control him or manipulate him or shame him or whatever, remember, you put the boundary on yourself, not on him.
And that's more direct than the passive aggressive approach of just like, Uncle Joe just doesn't get invited next time. You know what I mean? Because I think sometimes for all of us, there's the temptation to just sort of like freeze people out as opposed to give them the benefit of growth. You know, assuming the best that they...
Oh, you didn't rhyme it. I thought you were going to rhyme it.
How would I rhyme that?
Freeze people out instead of giving them the benefit of the doubt.
That's what I meant. That's the sticky statement. But giving them the chance to grow, where if they knew they were disappointing you, they might want to grow, you know?
That's true. But that's the other part of the book too, is that sometimes we can establish boundaries and people absolutely disrespect those boundaries over and over and over. Right. And so then you do need to start reducing the access that you grant that person because they aren't demonstrating the responsibility that they need to have, you know, in order to continue to participate in that. And if they're bringing zero responsibility, the second part of this book is goodbyes. And that's hard to talk about, but it actually, I do a deep dive in the book to help people see that too can be a very godly principle. If they bring zero responsibility, then we must consider zero access. And that should not be done in a vacuum. It should not be done in a heated moment of reaction. Sure. It needs to be done with wise counsel, much prayer. And we need to take steps, not leaps. But sometimes a goodbye is necessary. Right. And so I walk people through not just when to say goodbye, but having the biblical confidence of why sometimes that's necessary, how to have a mini funeral in your heart for what that will cost you, and then how to move forward. And that maybe for some situations, it's not a forever goodbye. It's just a goodbye for right now. And then in other cases, it may be a forever goodbye. But I felt it was really important to not ignore that side of it and to really address goodbyes, because I hadn't ever heard how to biblically say goodbye preached in a sermon or taught, you know, in my Christian walk. So it was important to me to do a deep theological dive on that and help educate people.
Oof. And you give such nuance to specific situations, because of course a topic like this, you know, even for us here, and we're coming to the end of our time with you, but you can't help but paint with a broom. And in the book, as people read this, they will hear how this is complicated when there's an addiction, which you had that specifics, and then the destructive behaviors and repeated opportunities and all the things. So I do want to say you have appendixes where you deal with specific issues. If there needs to be a counselor present at those conversations, if and when you're in danger, abuse, all of those things. So we cannot help but to say to our listening audience, get a copy of Good Boundaries and Goodbyes by Lysa TerKeurst. Audible, get the workbook. It's beautiful. The cover's amazing, but the contents are life-changing, and we're proud to always be pointing to your books. You've helped us with our books. I don't think there's anyone better. And this is not only a theological treatise on a subject that is often ignored, but you're also doing so in such a loving way with a cup of coffee in hand. But it's also just incredibly well written. You're an absolutely amazing author, and it is out of the well of your pain, which is very generous of you to go there and to not just, hey, like, I don't want to deal with all that. I'm going to live this, but I don't want to open up that vault. But you've ripped that off, and all of us say thank you.
Yes.
Oh, thank you, Levi. I think my favorite part of the book, spoiler alert, if you don't want to hear this, then, you know, let's end our time now.
La, la, la.
But I think my favorite part of the book is where at the very end, I'm deciding what to do with my wedding ring.
Yes, it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful.
And though the marriage ended in such a hard, harsh way, I still wanted there to be some good in the goodbye. And so the original way that word came about, people were originally saying, God be with ye. And then it got shortened to God be Y-E. And then that was shortened to goodbye. And so I started saying even though I couldn't control how challenging and that there were really awful parts to the goodbye, I had a moment where I stood in my closet and I took my wedding ring and put it where it needed to be. And I just whispered, goodbye, goodbye. God be with ye. Goodbye.
Stunning.
Jeez. Well, Lysa,
You're
this is
just
amazing.
beautiful. You're so beautiful.
But I do want to ask before we go, is there anything new in your life rhythm-wise? Is there anything fun that's different? Is there any new hobbies, new habits, something that's been challenging you lately? Or something that you've been discovering you've been nerding out on? Because I know you're kind of always on to the next thing and new projects and new fun things.
Okay, well, the answer might surprise you. But after 2 years of refusing to go on a date and refusing to even consider the possibility of another relationship, after 2 years, I, with a lot of help from my counselor, got to the place where I was actually willing to go on some dates. And it has not been as horrible as I thought. Actually, it's been nice. And, but here's a funny, quick little story and we'll end it. So I went on this date recently and the next day the guy texted me and I told him I was struggling with the topic of my next book. And he's not familiar with my books. So he had no idea of any of the titles of my previous books.
Does he not have Google?
Well, you know what's so funny? I request right from the very beginning. I said, please, I always say, please don't Google me because I want to tell you about me.
That's fun.
That's fun. So that when we come together, it's like, he doesn't know about me. I don't know about him. And there's an equality there that's important to me. So, anyhow, so the next day after we went on our date, he texted me and he said, I have no, he said, I'm being very vulnerable here because I have no right to speak into what your next book is about. But I have just being with you that one night, I have an idea that I think you should write on. And so I texted him, I said, what is your idea? And he said, I really think that you need to write a book on boundaries because I watched you so clearly communicate your boundaries last night. And within your boundaries, you were completely free. You were not rigid. You weren't like shaming or no part of it was awkward. He's like, you just really did that well last night. And I laughed so hard.
That is funny.
And I honestly just sat down in my chair and I said to myself, Lysa TerKeurst, you are living your message. And that is really good.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
I love that.
Well, I'm glad. Good for you. You deserve that. And I hope it goes well. I promised you were off, but I have to do one more. We love a good party, and I don't know anybody who throws a better party than you.
I'm
just going to say this.
Honestly.
The person who's listening, and we've talked about this before, we've had different people on with hospitality and different things. What do you think is maybe like one ace in the hole? People can, like, if they want to just take a party to another level, what's one thing they could add in? Because you're famous for it. I mean, honestly, your parties are legendary. What's one little like, hey, you didn't think about this, but maybe not even some big splurge cost thing, but something you can do that takes a party to the next level?
Ooh, nice question.
Think about the guest experience from the moment they pull in to the moment they pull out. And always remember the thrill of the unexpected. And that each of us have a childlike spirit and most people don't like shallow conversations at parties. So give people something to do rather than just stand around and have shallow conversations. And so at my Christmas party recently, we had a DJ and that was fun, and people were dancing and stuff. But then the DJ brought out, this was the like big ta-da, but my kids actually surprised me with this. I didn't even know this was going to happen at the party, but they had the DJ do silent disco where you put on headphones. And so nobody hears the music unless you have your headphones on, and you can turn to different stations to listen to different music. So everybody's dancing, but the people who don't have the headphones on are hearing everybody sing off key, and they're watching everybody dance in supposed silence. And it is true. And you make videos, so it's like you're singing and dancing and you're making a video. But then when you watch the video back later, you hear just how crazy you sound when you try to sing these songs. So, just think about the guest experience. Think about just making it an incredible experience from the time they pull up to the time they leave.
The thrill of the unexpected was
I
the sound.
love that.
Says the woman with a slide in her living room. Mary Poppins over here, honestly.
Seriously.
Well, Lisa, you're a gift. You're a gift to us, to so many.
We love you.
Lysa TerKeurst, everybody. The Good Boundaries and Goodbyes is the title of the book. One of many.
One of many.
Goodness
books.
Gracious. And all the things you have going on. But we absolutely love you and are your biggest fans up here in Montana, and can't wait till we get you back or we're sitting around a table together.
I would absolutely love that.
And everybody's listening going, okay, I'm going to go do portion control. All of us on our way. We're going to do guacamole, but a small amount of guacamole.
Little cup of
guacamole. All right, Lysa TerKeurst, thank you.
We love you, Lisa.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I love you guys too. And I really look forward to seeing you soon.